Hi, everyone. I have 20 minutes. I hit the start button on my stopwatch, and I want to share some things about the what I've been thinking through and what I've been thinking through with other people as I have a lot of phone calls during the week with other people, analytics leaders, about the COVID reset. I figured it makes sense in this context to provide a bit of introduction because we all have very different experiences coming into this space. I started in math, specifically actuarial science, and have been in a lot of roles in insurance and finance and business intelligence. I started in people analytics in 2005. It was called HR Business Intelligence at the time. That was with Target. I went to a firm called Inform, which was bought by SuccessFactors, General Electric, and Allianz, a Munich-based insurance company that's global. And now I'm back working for a small company, like Inform was, and a lot of the same people. So we are a people analytics company, and our website's there. I'm going to continue on because I want to make sure I get to this stuff. So, thinking about there's different phases that I've been seeing in the COVID piece from a work and economic standpoint. So these things are I think, driven by the government, companies, and then the economic impact is creating a reduced demand for labor. So these are changing a lot of what's going on inside companies. What issues are emerging related to this that I've been tracking are worker stress, technology and space equity. So, you have different people have different abilities to work and work effectively from home. I decided to take off my background of that nice island view and show you that this is which I feel pretty fortunate, even though I have a really tiny window for daylight. I actually have space that is workable here. Managerial skills are emerging. Managers are being tasked in different ways. And even another conversation from earlier today is leadership is changing, where you might have had a group of leaders as kind of a blob around a theoretical mean of leadership skills. This stressful kind of jarring of the system has really spread things out. And you can see the leaders that are at the tails now. You can see the really poor leaders and you can see the really good leaders, because this is a time of immense disruption and stress. So we're seeing that emerging as well. Productivity concerns, some people are saying, hey, productivity is just fine, we have less commuting, so it's kind of an open issue there. On the analytics side, I think that the first survey, and I believe surveys say what you care about, so are you okay? If there's one question that you had to ask, I would, if you gave me one question, I would say, are you okay? And the next one would be, what do you need? And then I would start asking probably questions about how's it going with your team and your boss. But I would start at the fundamentals. We're really working at really core stuff now. Capacity, who's working? Who do we have available? What's the mix of the roles that are in our workforce right now? And again, productivity is an analytical topic. So you can see on the right, think about these buckets of workers. You got the essential ones, they kept working. You got people who switched to remote, and somebody's got their feet up. And I'm not saying they're not working, but they're really comfortable. Somebody's baby is kind of crawling around, and somebody else is in a small apartment and no desk. And so, that's that remote situation, at least in this graph, is 2/3 not so great. And then obviously there's a lot of people who've been laid off, and we're seeing the impacts of that. This is from the US labor market. I know this is predominantly a Canadian group, and I don't think we're going to have Canada data in this project, which will probably run through the end of the year. But I thought there's some value to this because I think the patterns, I would imagine, are pretty close. And what I wanted to share with you from here is that businesses hire when they feel like they can afford to pay somebody, right? It's pretty basic. So in other words, job listings, which we would consider as a form of the demand of talent in the marketplace, is a leading indicator of the economy. And we see that these results on the right, which are indexed to March 1st, and you can see hospitality plummets negative 80% and is starting to come up, and entertainment is down around negative 60%. But you've got a lot of variation across different industries. They kind of cluster together a little bit and then they're separating again. So we're seeing this kind of uneven recovery across industries. The instability is persisting, and instability is going to show up in that companies are reluctant to start to bring employees back. And the first thing that happens is they'll bring people back from furlough and temporary layoffs, and then they'll start to post jobs. We're not seeing that happen yet. We are seeing a gradual return into the negative, 30 to 45% range. But this is tough. And so the unemployment spiked nearly instantaneously, and in the US it hit about 15%. So I thought I would share that. The website link is down there, and find out on my LinkedIn profile. So I had a couple of things I want to share with you regarding the reset and how what I'm hoping to do, and what I'm hoping you can walk away with, is a little bit of framing and some thoughts, and I'll make sure that this set of pages is available to you. So when you're resetting, the first thing I see going on is that companies are reassessing their workforce needs and the costs. So what can we do between now and the end of the year? How much can we afford? So they're redoing budgets, they're redoing headcount plans. I think everybody that's involved in people analytics, crisis means kind of pivot into where your help is needed. And I think these are some of them. Decisions on calling back furloughed workers, and that's related to your headcount you have and what you can afford and what you need. Which roles are we going to replace? So this comes down to a different type of critical role. Data, like a software engineer, might have been a critical role because of its difficulty to hire, but that set of projects might have been put on hold. That role is not critical in the moment. So a lot of roles that are becoming critical are like operational roles to keep the lights on. So facilities workers became incredibly critical, and probably more important than a bunch of software developers that were just put on the bench because that project cannot be done at this point in time. Certain transformation projects put on hold. So replacing workers in critical roles. Some industries are obviously growing, and so setting reentry strategies is another thing companies are right now setting the specifics for. When are we going to open back up? What's that going to look like logistically? The real estate teams, I'm a little concerned about this at some points, because I think they're like, wow, we don't need, I don't know if they're going to get them, talk their way out of a job, but with all this space, we don't need it. We can save all this money. Another place for, people analytics to be involved, like, are you able to return to work? What do you need? Do you want to return to your workspace that you had? Because maybe, the person that's sitting on their bed, and probably to some extent the person whose infant is crawling around while they're trying to get work done, some of those people just want to get back to an office where they can kind of resume something like the consistency, productivity that they may have had. Other people want to stay home. Workforce planning is what do we need versus what we have. Fundamentally, that's what it is at the end of the day. And what are we going to do about it? And that means what do we need in terms of numbers of people and in terms of skills, role mix, size, location, versus what we have now. So the analytics that are going to come in, again, survey stuff, workforce plan. Anytime you have a lot of people leaving, layoffs, things like that with a workforce, you have to go back to spans and layers, because after reductions, you end up with like Swiss cheese with a bunch of holes in your previous organization. And if you remember what it used to be like when you have to hit on your computer to defragment your hard drive, it looked like there was a bunch of gaps in there, and after you're done, it kind of like comes back. The organizations have a lot of like, I guess, blank spots in that, and they can be condensed. So I think these are some of the items that I want to emphasize to you. Then the next thing I want to do is emphasize you design your workforce with intentionality. This should be the case all the time, but I'm going to bring this into a much shorter lens. Strategic workforce planning is oftentimes around a 3 or 5 year time horizon. This time horizon of about 6 months would normally be kind of counted as more operational, but there's a strategic imperative to get this right. So you cannot do strategic workforce planning or any really good workforce planning without going to the business leaders and having the conversations. And that means the HR business partners go do it, or the workforce planning team, or the analytics team, or in smaller companies, the person who's in charge of the budget. So what can you afford? What can you afford remaining in 2020? Which roles or projects are going to shrink? What's going to grow? And think in terms of vectors. If you try to get people down to specific numbers first, it becomes difficult. Think vectors. Vectors, going back to geometry, which is one of my favorites, is direction and magnitude. You want to go up a lot, down a little, down a lot, stay flat, etc. over the next 6 months. So getting that taken care of. What's changed? Get the data together. You can do this on your own. You don't need to, engage the business on this one, but what's changed since March 1st? This is a really unusual moment where you're going to pick a March 1st, never meant so much in terms of analytics, but this is when things really, you go back to that date, things really changed after that. So what's changed? How many are active now? Number furloughed? What's the mix of roles at March 1st? What's the mix of locations? And what is it today? And just get an idea of the delta that's changed in the workforce. It might be exactly the same if but in almost all cases, I think you're going to find out that there's a number of people who've had to go on leave, perhaps take care of sick relatives as well. All right, so basic workforce plan to 2020. Talent segments, group similar roles together, really fundamental piece of workforce planning. Define your cost constraints, mentioned that earlier. Set your target year-end headcount numbers by talent segment. The budget you had before is unlikely to be the budget that's going to be in place. So get in and involved in that budget. You might even be part of shaping what that budget's going to be, but it's definitely not the budget you started the year with. Compare to current headcount figures, figure out what the gap is. And then most importantly, prioritize what actions are going to be taken to close gaps. Workforce planning, when done well, is dealing with skills and roles, shape of the workforce, et cetera. So, but it comes down to what are we going to do between now and the end of the year in this case. And let me just leave you with a couple of last things. I'm only including this. I just took a quick marker and kind of marked out, like, look, get out to the year end. These are different talent segments, call center rep. We have 100 people. We want to go to 90 to 80 next year. You don't need to go out to 2024. You probably don't even need to do 2021, but figure out some I'm only sharing this so you get a basic kind of layout of what you could do in a simple Excel model. Current headcount, attrition, and what you need. This is from your leader conversations. So I'll leave that with you as a takeaway. Last thing is your workforce, when you build forward better, that means that when you come out of this economic and pandemic downturn, you want to build forward better. So you should develop during this time, you build during, you get creative during these times, right? A sharper view on what's needed now and in the future. That's workforce planning. So that should be a goal. I want to have a sharper view on what's needed now and in the future. Better understanding of what your employees need and want. Companies that have good continuous listening survey infrastructure in place are reaping major benefits from it, because all the employees are conditioned that they might get a survey once a week from the company, and they are used to responding, and they also have ways that they're getting value back because they see the results. Those companies are able right now to ask those questions. Are you okay? What do you need? How is your team doing? They can pulse survey because they've already done that. So those companies are reaping that benefit. Those who don't have it, set up that kind of infrastructure now. Think through what are the new managerial skills that are going to be needed at this point in time. How do you measure it? How do you capture it? Are there offerings being done by your learning and development team that you want to help to define? And then lastly, the solving for gaps in data. think back, what data do you wish you had when all, when people started coming to you and saying, I need this, and you're kind of stuck. We did not all have the information we needed for the questions that came up in this pandemic. So I thought that's it. Thank you. And there's some other appendix slides that we don't need to reference. But I thought that leaving hopefully 5 minutes for questions, that was my goal, and that's why I talked really fast.
No, that was great.